What I wanted to do today is I wanted to take a look at some of the major arguments for and against compensation beyond scholarship in college athletics. Certainly there are good arguments on both sides, and it's important to get all of these arguments on the table. This is a very relevant issue. It's an issue that's being decided right now, actually, because the Supreme Court is ruling on a college compensation case. Okay, if you'll follow along with me, I'm going to go ahead and list, first of all, the most prominent argument in favor of compensation beyond scholarships, and that's the social justice argument. Okay, so given the revenue, income, and alumni donations that universities make from college athletics, athletes ought to be compensated beyond their scholarships on social justice grounds. Okay, and the argument's pretty straightforward. The argument is that there's a pretty big discrepancy between the amount of revenue, income, and alumni donations that are brought in by universities and the amount of pay in the form of scholarships that athletes are receiving. This discrepancy is especially large at the big-time universities. Okay, so in the world of college athletics, there's definitely a hierarchy in terms of universities and a hierarchy in terms of sports. Okay, so in terms of sports, the hierarchy goes men's football is here, men's basketball is here, and everybody else is down here. Okay, women's basketball, some people care a little bit about, okay? But pretty much it's men's football, and then to a much lesser extent, men's basketball, and women's basketball is way down the list. And my sport, when I was in college, cross country and track and field is a sport that basically no one cares about. Okay, we had to go out and we had to actually pass flyers out to get people to come to our meets when I was in college because nobody gave a rip. Okay, no one cares about women's golf, no one cares about swimming, no one cares about beach volleyball. They care about the big-time sports. Okay, and also there's a hierarchy in terms of universities. So take a look, if you would please, with me at the athletic compensation document. I'm sorry, it's titled NCAA Write-Up 1. Okay, and the table there at the beginning of that chapter, which I photocopied, gives us a value list of major conference college football programs in millions. And this is a snapshot that came from several years ago. So this list has changed somewhat, although not a whole lot. Okay, the most valuable college football program as of, I believe, 2015 is UT Austin. Okay, they may not be able to win on the field, at least not that much, but boy, they know how to market. Boy, they know how to get people to wear their gear and slap their bumper stickers on their cars and so forth. Michigan is second. Florida, Notre Dame, I'm going to read off these programs here. Ohio State, Auburn, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Oklahoma. That's the top 10 in terms of most valuable college football programs. What do those top 10 schools all have in common, those of you who are aware of the college football world? They're in southern states? I hadn't thought of that. They are Southern dominated. That is true. They are SEC dominated. That is correct. I was actually thinking of a couple of other characteristics, Deontay, but I hadn't thought of that. I think you're right. There's a majority in southern states. So how about this one? They are primarily public schools. Okay, Notre Dame is the only program on that list that's private. And in fact, actually, in the world of big-time college athletics, it's overwhelmingly dominated by public schools, by state schools. Okay, I could probably count on one hand the number of universities that are private and that can regularly compete at the highest levels athletically. So Notre Dame obviously being one, primarily in men's football, but also Baylor in football and basketball, Vanderbilt, Stanford, Georgetown in men's basketball, That's probably about it. It's primarily state school dominated. Okay? And the other thing that I think stands out is those programs, the top 10 programs, are all well-known, multi-decade winning programs. Okay? All those top 10 programs have built a brand that extends back decades and that includes long-standing winning traditions. Okay, and probably Alabama has moved up that list a little bit. This is from 2015. Maybe there's been a little bit of change in that list, but it more or less stays the same. Okay, now with that in mind, let's go back to the slide we were just looking at. Given the revenue, income, and alumni donations that universities make from college athletics, the social justice argument says, athletes ought to be compensated beyond their scholarships on social justice grounds. The average value of a UT Austin scholarship football player to the university, to UT Austin, is about $1 million. Okay, the average amount of compensation in the total package that they get, remember this is a state school, so the tuition is less than private schools, it's about $50,000. Okay, so it's far less than the value that's being brought in by the player. Okay, and the value of the player varies, of course, in accordance with the position and skill of the player, whether the player is first string, second string, third string, that sort of thing. But the average is about $1 million. Okay, there are different versions of the social justice argument. One version of it says that compensation beyond scholarships should be based on individual monetary value to the university. Okay, this is the market-based solution, the free market-based solution here. This version of the social justice argument says that, look, if a blue chip recruit, a 5-star recruit, is worth $4 million to the university, then what we need to have is, for social justice reasons, we need to have a free market where different universities can bid on the services of this 5-star recruit and sign him to a contract that includes salaries beyond scholarship. And the most just thing is a free market where the value of each player is determined by what the market will bear. Okay, what universities are willing to pay. And obviously, in that sort of a circumstance, the star quarterback might be paid $4 or $5 million. The skilled positions, the receivers, the running backs, might also be compensated really well. And then third stringers, offensive linemen who sit the bench, they're going to be compensated far less. But that argument, that version of the social justice argument, has lots of problems. Okay, the primary problem with it is it doesn't really disperse the money equally. Okay, so another version of the social justice argument says compensation should be divided equally among the participants in each sport. In other words, there should be salaries beyond scholarship, but those salaries ought to be the same for all the football players, or all the men's basketball players, or all the women's basketball players, so that there is no injustice or inequity in the pay scheme within each sport. So you might see on that version of the argument, football players making $250,000 a year, all of them. Okay, something on that nature. Okay, but that argument also has its problems, because after all, there are other sports as well, not just men's football. And some have said compensation should be divided equally across all sports. So the smaller sports have athletes that work very hard, athletes that incur risk of injury. They are deserving of compensation as well. And so maybe divide up the compensation across all sports, make it salary beyond scholarship, but not loaded towards the heavy revenue generating sports. So there you might see all the athletes making something like $85,000 or $90,000 a year across all sports. But there are still others who say that the main thing that needs to happen in the social justice argument is an incorporation of gender equity considerations. Okay, and here, this is really dangerous territory argumentatively. It's dangerous because the market-based reality is there are two men's sports that dominates the scene in college athletics. Okay, and basically no women's sports. One women's sport, women's basketball, has generated some following. But no women's sport is really in the same league in terms of fan interest. Okay, so if universities were to disperse compensation beyond scholarship equally across all athletic programs, it would involve doing so over and against merit-based considerations that take into account the amount of revenue that the sport generates. Okay, it would have to be done in the face of markets-based, merit-based considerations that say those athletes who bring in the most should be compensated the most. Let me stop and ask if there are questions or comments so far about the social justice argument. There are arguments against scholarship beyond compensation. Compensation beyond scholarship. The most important such argument is universities are educational institutions, not businesses. It goes as follows. Universities are educational institutions, not businesses. To compensate athletes beyond their scholarships would alter the nature of higher education in damaging ways. Universities are nonprofit organizations. Their historic mission, dating back many hundreds of years, really over a millennium, has been to educate young people. To educate young people to prepare them professionally, to prepare them for life, to prepare them just as adults who know things about the world. And for universities to compensate athletes beyond scholarship would be for them, in many cases, to become businesses that are run for profit. Okay, just kind of nakedly and openly, businesses run for profit. The football programs and basketball programs would become farm teams, formal farm teams for the professional leagues. Okay, and a lot of the other things that universities have historically done might get pushed to the side. Now notice that the argument that universities are primarily educational institutions is an argument that works especially well for those universities that don't have the big-time football programs. Okay, so I'm talking about Power 5 conference programs. At those kinds of universities, if you look at the revenue structure, honestly, it looks like a business, the way that the university is set up. But HBU, for example, doesn't bring in that much money. In fact, our athletics programs actually lose money. Okay. Now, when you count alumni donations, they make it up, which is why we have. I think that's largely the reason why we have athletics programs. You guys know why we have men's football? 3 reasons. 1, to promote the school's name and brand, because there's no better way to do that than through a football program. Okay, 2, to generate alumni donations, because the primary thing that alumni want to give for the sake of is the football program. And 3, to retain male students, because HBU has a men problem. Okay, we are, I believe we are 72% women at entrance. I think we're 68% women at admission, and I think the number is 76% women at graduation. It actually gets worse. But the university has done studies, and more men stay in school when there's a football program. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why we have HBU football. Also, of course, probably so that our football players can enjoy the competition and, be able to play on the field. But I think honestly, that's probably further down the list of reasons. Although it's a wonderful thing, I think, to have. Okay, let's look at another argument in favor of compensation beyond scholarship: time, effort, and injury arguments. This is less common than the social justice argument, but you do see it out there in the debate. Given the time and effort that student athletes put into their sports and given the risk of injury that student athletes incur, compensation beyond scholarship is deserved. The question then arises, should this compensation be divided equally across sports? Should it vary by sport? Pretty clearly, if you look at the time and effort that is put in by college athletes, it looks like a job. Okay, the numbers go about as follows. Big sport athletes at big time universities spend about 65 hours a week doing their sport. Okay, that's Texas A&M, that's UT Austin, that's LSU. At smaller universities, big time sports takes about 45 hours a week. Okay, if you look at the small-time sports, they take a bit less time, about 35 hours a week. Okay, and these numbers are counting all the training time in addition to, strictly speaking, the practice time. But it includes training room time, it includes watching video, it includes sessions with coaches and so forth. But these numbers look like a job, whether it's a big sport or a small sport. Okay, and the argument is that given that time and effort, and also if you add to that the risk of injury, compensation beyond scholarship is deserved. Any reflections on that argument? You guys agree or disagree with that one? Actually, oh yeah, Jolante. I said, any reflections on this argument, the time effort and injury argument? Do people agree or disagree with this argument?
I see both sides to it because you are there for an education. A lot of those kids wouldn't have gotten in if it weren't for those programs at the bigger schools.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, they're taking a spot of a kid who maybe had, 4.0 GPA and was academically more qualified to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And they are getting a lot of help with their degree. I know I have a friend that plays football at Miami, and they get the test before.
Oh yeah, that's pretty common.
Like they get everything, all the academic stuff, or people are doing it for them.
Sure.
And they get all of these other,
Perks.
Perks, yeah.
Yes.
As well as getting to travel.
Sure.
And, all of everything that comes with being an athlete at those big schools. You get a lot of opportunities that way as well.
Right, so it could be said that there's already plenty of compensation going into the college athletics package. And making an argument on the basis of time, effort, and risk of injury that more compensation is deserved might be too much. Okay.
I agree.
John, say you agree? Okay. Okay, I find the social justice argument more convincing than the second argument, the time, effort, and injury argument. The reason being that the social justice argument is based on the amount of money that the players bring in. I find that much more convincing. Because you could have a hobby where you spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and even incur a risk of injury. Bungee jumping, hang gliding, I don't know. And we wouldn't say that you are deserving of compensation for your hobby just because of time, effort, and injury. Much more powerful, I think, is to say somebody is deserving of compensation because of the amount of money that their presence as an employee at a company generates, and that the current system actually does not provide opportunity for that to be expressed. Let's look at another argument against compensation beyond scholarship. This is the equality of universities argument. Compensation for college athletes above and beyond a scholarship would undermine equality in college athletics and would be damaging to smaller schools. Smaller schools would be unable to compete, and state schools would be advantaged over private schools. Okay, the reason why HBU is able to compete at the level that it does is because of the current system. This last fall, we almost won in Lubbock. That was really important to the university's brand and image. That would not happen if Texas Tech were able to substantially outspend HBU in acquiring players. So the scholarship system serves as a kind of a salary cap, preventing big schools like UT Austin and Texas A&M from engaging in an arms race for athletic talent over and against smaller schools, in which case they would absolutely destroy HBU. Okay, there's some parity on the field these days because the scholarship system serves as a salary cap. So the argument here is that actually it would be harmful to smaller schools, and it's good for college athletics as a competitive enterprise for there to be some equality across universities. Okay, a couple more here, folks. The monopoly-based argument in favor of compensation beyond scholarship, it goes as follows. The NCAA is a monopoly which is abusing its position in college athletics to favor certain special interest groups. Monopolies are bad in business, so they are bad in athletics too. The NCAA should be broken up, and competing collegiate athletics leagues ought to be formed with accompanying increases in compensation possibilities. Who actually makes the money that's brought in by big-time college athletics? Well, there are several special interest groups that do. Okay, one group that makes the money is the coaching staffs. Okay, if you look at the numbers, suppose I were to show you a map of the United States, and in each state, the name of the public employee who has the highest salary of any public employee in the state were to be shown, with that state. What you would find is that about 45 of the 50 states have as their highest salaried public employee the football coach at the state school. And of the 5 that do not, they have as their highest salaried public employee the basketball coach at the largest state school. Okay, Kansas, North Carolina, Tennessee, a couple of other states like that have as their highest salaried public employee the basketball coach. Nick Saban probably makes, how much does Nick Saban make? Does anybody know? I think it's in the 10 million ballpark. Maybe it's a little bit more. It might be 10 to 12 million. Definitely that's a special interest group that makes a lot. Somebody look up how much Nick Saban makes, actually. 9.3. Okay, that probably comes with some extras along with that salary as such. Okay, it's a lot of money regardless, and he's part of a special interest group that makes a lot. It's not just coaching staffs, though. A lot of administrators make a lot of money from this. Okay, and also universities use a lot of the money that comes in from athletics programs to build buildings. A lot of it is used to build buildings and make campuses nicer. So if the university has a new science school that they want to build, or a new XYZ facility, a lot of that money will be brought in by athletics programs. Now, that's not necessarily the case at HBU. Okay, at HBU, it's really different because we're a small school, and we're primarily solvent because of student tuition, not because of athletics. Okay, athletics at HBU, I know I have athletes in the room, but let's just be brutal for a second. It's not as though the alumni give because of the outperformance of HBU athletics. Okay, it primarily comes from other sources. All right, so on the monopoly-based argument, the NCAA is serving as a monopoly, which is abusing its position just to favor special interest groups, and this is a bad thing. One final argument against compensation beyond scholarship, the free choice in labor argument. This one goes right to the heart of management labor disputes in any kind of a workplace enterprise, not just college athletics. Suppose it is assumed that college athletes are workers. The work contracts that the athletes sign are not physically or mentally coerced. The athletes are freely choosing to work for universities. So since they are freely entering contracts and can choose not to work, the current system is not unjust. Okay, this is an argument that has had a multi-century history in management labor disputes. As long as there is not coercion involved, there's a free choice of contract, and you don't have to enter into a contract that you don't like. And so if college athletes don't like the contracts that they're getting, or the compensation that they're getting currently, they don't have to play. It's not as though anybody's forcing this. Okay, and of course, college athletes are compensated a lot more than the vast majority of students are, unless you have a full ride for some academic reason or because you qualified for scholarships on some other grounds, maybe as a legacy student or something. College athletes are getting a lot more money than the rest of the student body. Okay, and so perhaps it could be argued that that's sufficient to compensate them already. Questions or comments? Let's take 5 minutes and make this real. We're going to look at 3 questions in groups. Just 5 minutes. Okay, let's have a group of 3 over here. And here's 5 people. Let's divide up into 2 groups here. Okay? Let's make it a group of 3 and a group of 2. Question number 1 that I want you guys, assign a scribe. Put the people in your group down on the scribe sheet so I know who is in each group and so I can take attendance that way. And then split up and let's decide your group's answers to the following questions. 1, are university athletes workers or are they not? Provide reasons for your decision. 2, should university athletes and especially football players be paid beyond their scholarships? Provide reasons for your decision. And 3, are universities primarily places of study or are other things at universities equally important, athletic, student organizations, etc.? Okay, let's go ahead and split up into groups and we will reconvene in about 5 minutes and share our answers.